Welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. My name's Jim. Thanks for joining me. We continue our Year 1 Great Books reading program series with the dialogue Crito, written by the Greek philosopher Plato. Crito naturally follows our previous reading, the Apology. Let's pick up where we left off. Socrates has been tried and convicted of impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens, and he has been sentenced to death. The story continues here with Crito, a friend of Socrates, who comes to visit him in jail while he awaits the day of execution. Now, in this deep dive, I'd like to track through the dialogue and comment on a few key passages. At the conclusion of the deep dive, we'll be ready to take up a set of heavyweight discussion questions about both the Apology and the Crito. Now, if you haven't read Crito, I ask that you do so before continuing with the video. It's quite short. It can be read easily in one sitting. It's very readable. I never want my take on this text to be a substitute for you actually engaging with Plato's words. Think of this video series as a sit-down chat after you've read the text for yourself. Now, the English translation I'm using is the Benjamin Jowett translation, and it is in the Great Books of the Western World. I happen to be using the second edition, 1990, but it's the same translation as the first edition, published by Encyclopedia Britannica. And in the show description, I'll link to a version of this book at archive.org. They have the 1952 version up there. Now let's set the scene. There are two speakers in this dialogue, Socrates and his friend Crito. We're in the prison where Socrates has been incarcerated. He's been convicted already. He's awaiting the day of his execution. Crito arrives, and when he first gets there, Socrates is sleeping undisturbed, and Crito is watching him, and he is amazed at how peacefully Socrates is slumbering. And then Socrates wakes up. And Crito says, "Never did I see anything like the easy, tranquil manner in which you bear this calamity." So this is a man who's on death row, and yet he's sleeping like a baby. Odd. Crito reports some news that the awaited ship from Delos is coming into port, and when it does, Socrates will die the following day. Now, Athens had a custom of sending a ship to the island of Delos, which is the mythical birthplace of Apollo, every year. It was an annual religious mission, and they had festivals or games and something like that. I think it was in the springtime, probably May or June, and this period lasted for about a month. And during that period, no executions were allowed in the city-state of Athens. It was a time of ritual purification for the city. Now, Socrates' trial and sentencing happened to coincide with this period, so his execution has been delayed until the ship returns. In the dialogue, Socrates reports that he had a dream vision suggesting that he might have yet one more day to live. But the point is that whether it's today, tomorrow, or the day after, the time is very short. And Crito has come to visit with a purpose in mind. He has a mission. He wants to persuade Socrates to escape, to leave Athens for good. Now, what are his reasons for that? First of all, Crito says he will lose a friend whom he cannot replace. Second, Crito's own reputation will suffer. People will think that he was too stingy to bribe the jailer, or that he does not care about his friend Socrates. Socrates comes back and says, "Why, my dear Crito, should we care about the opinions of the many?" Crito says, "We should worry because your case shows us how much evil the opinions of the many can do." Remember, Socrates has been railroaded. He's been steamrolled, unjustly convicted, unjustly sentenced to death. Why and how can you let the bad guys win? Crito is also worried that Socrates refuses to escape because he wants to protect his friends from punishment. He doesn't want to see Crito and others be punished on his behalf. Socrates does admit that this is one of his concerns, but it's not the only one, maybe not the most important one. Crito says to him, "Don't worry, fear not, we can work it out with very little risk. Moreover, there are friends, you have friends and allies in other places who will protect you when you leave Athens. They will support you. Don't worry about it. We can do this." And he also says this to Socrates, "Nor can I think that you are at all justified in betraying your own life when you might be saved. One, in acting thus, you are playing into the hands of your enemies. 2, you are deserting your own children. 3, you appear to be choosing the easier path, not the better path and the manlier path. I am ashamed not only of you, but both of us who are your friends." All right, so a few things to unpack there, but letting the bad guys win, forsaking your duty to your family, and your lack of courage are bad looks, right? It's not going to look good if you take the easier path. You just go to your death and don't even try to escape. You're abandoning your children, and you're letting the bad guys win. But Socrates cannot agree with this, not on principle. And he comes back with an argument. His first point is he takes up the principle that, quote, "the opinions of some men are to be regarded and of other men not to be regarded." Okay, so they both agree that the opinions of good men should be regarded and not the opinions of bad men. So don't care about what the bad men think, but do care about what the good men think. Goodness is connected to wisdom and bad to the lack of wisdom, the unwise. And then he moves to an analogy. He likes analogies, Socrates. Should a gymnastics student attend to the opinions of non-experts? No, only the trainer. And if the pupil disobeys and disregards that opinion, he will come to evil outcomes. The same is true for questions of just and unjust, fair and foul, good and evil. We should only follow the opinion of the one who understands the truth of the matter, not the many. Okay? He goes on, but some will object that the many can kill us. And Socrates introduces another premise to beat back this particular objection. What is it that we chiefly value? Is it life or the good life, which is equivalent to the just and the honorable life? And he says, let's stick to the just and honorable path. Now, as to the question whether Socrates should escape without the consent of the state, he would be defying the laws of Athens, obviously, if he broke out and left Athens at this point. He says, we must be steadfast in holding to the principle that we are never intentionally to do wrong. Doing wrong is always evil in Socrates' book. And we should not do evil in return for evil. So Athens has harmed me by convicting me and sentencing me to death. I've been wronged. But I can't return wrong for wrong. Next, he poses a question, ought a man to do what he admits to be right, or ought he to betray the right? So the question boils down to this, is escaping the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? Socrates, in leaving the prison against the will of the Athenians, do I wrong any? Or rather, do I not wrong those whom I ought least to wrong? Do I not desert the principles which were acknowledged by us to be just? Do you imagine that the state can subsist and not be overthrown in which the decisions of law have no power, but are set aside and trampled upon by individuals. In other words, to do your own thing when it's convenient for you to do so is to undermine the state. But we might argue that the state has injured us and rendered an unjust sentence. Isn't it right to do something about that? Now, Socrates shifts into an imagined dialogue at this point. It's like a dialogue within a dialogue. And now the dialogue is between himself, Socrates, and the personification of the law of the state of Athens. So the law comes in and says, what's your complaint? How can you justify ignoring the state? Didn't we bring you up, nurture you, educate you? You are a child of the state. You are not on equal terms with us, nor can you think that you have a right to do to us what we are doing to you. Would you have the right to strike back at your father or slave master if you receive some evil from them? The same applies to serving our country in war or court of law. You must do what the state orders of you. Moreover, you had freedom of movement if you thought our laws unjust. You could have emigrated. No one would have stopped you. When you stay here, there is an implied contract that you will do as we command you. When you disobey, you commit 3 wrongs. First, you are disobeying your parents. Second, you have wronged your education. Third, you're wrong because you have this implied contract to abide by our laws and decisions. And this especially applies to you, Socrates, because you've lived here all your life. You never went elsewhere. You loved it here. You married here. You had children here. Plus, at the trial, you could have fixed the penalty at banishment. At trial, you said you preferred death to exile. Now you want to run away? Turn your back on the agreement you made as a citizen? Take our advice. Do not make yourself ridiculous by escaping out of the city. If you escape, harms will ensue. Friends will be driven into exile. They'll lose their citizenship and their property. The city you arrive at will see you as an enemy, a subversive, a corrupter of the young. Your reputation will be shot. Your kids will be deprived of the benefits of Athenian citizenship. You won't be happier, holier, juster if you escape. If you stay and accept the punishment, quote, you depart in innocence, a sufferer and not a doer of evil, a victim not of the laws but of men, end quote. Here's another quote. But if you go forth, returning evil for evil and injury for injury, breaking the covenants and agreements which you have made with us, and wronging those whom you at least have all to wrong, that is to say, yourself, your friends, your country, and us, we shall be angry with you while you live, and our brother in the laws in the world below will receive you as an enemy. For they will know that you have done your best to destroy us. Listen then to us and not to Crito. And to this, Crito has no response. As usual in Plato's dialogues, Socrates' argument wins the day. To review then, Socrates' argument is premised on the value of living justly. It isn't good enough to simply preserve your life. Put it another way, just living is better than just living. All right, maybe that doesn't clear it up a whole lot, but hopefully you get the point. It isn't good enough to just live. You have to live justly. We shouldn't worry ourselves about public opinion either. Who cares? Let's put our energy into living virtuously and avoiding wrongdoing. Maybe to put a finer point on it, we should be more concerned with doing good and how good people would regard us. The opinions of the many are presumably not so good, so we should disregard their opinions. Furthermore, doing wrong always harms the doer regardless of the consequences. If Socrates were to escape, this would be an act of moral self-harm, and it also harms the state. To escape would be to break the social contract he has with Athens. And if Socrates is entitled to do that, why not anyone else? If he were to escape, Socrates would be a renegade, unwelcome in any other city-states. He'd confirm all the suspicions about him, that he's a subversive of law and order. The argument boils down to this. Deciding whether escape is an act of injustice, if it is so, that is, if it is an act of injustice, it's wrong. And we never want to do wrong. So we can't escape. Better to be a victim of injustice than a perpetrator of injustice. That's a high moral standard, is it not? To preserve your moral principles over and above your own self-preservation. Here are some discussion questions about the Apology and Crito dialogues. First one. How does Socrates define a good life? Is it simply about living, or is there something more to it? How do you define the good life? How do you define it? How compatible is your definition with Socrates's? Now remember, his remarks in the Apology about the unexamined life not being worth living, that would be one component of it. Compare that to his remarks here in the Crito dialogue. It seems to me that the good life in Socrates' view is one that is spent pursuing the meaning of life, that's the examining life part, and being a good person in alignment with justice and virtue. Here's another question. Both dialogues deal with the theme of public opinion versus truth and justice, and how those two don't always align. Should Socrates have been more concerned about public opinion? Would it have saved his life? Would that sort of life still be worth living? This harkens back a lot to the Apology, where if he had been more concerned about public opinion, especially the jurors at the trial, his fellow citizens, he probably would have used different rhetoric to argue his side of the case. But that was not the case. And he almost forced them to convict him, you could say. And if he had changed course, would that have saved his life? It probably would have. He also could have argued for a more lenient sentence, and it probably would have been granted. But no, he didn't do that. He said he preferred death to exile and so forth. Would that, if he had changed course and done things differently and played into public opinion, well, he might have saved his life and still been allowed to philosophize and so on and so forth, or he could have gone elsewhere and do his philosophy. Would that be the kind of life that would still be worth living? He has some arguments in the Apology that we've covered previously about that, but you can go back and revisit those passages to see what he says about it. Here's another question. Do you have a problem with Socrates accepting the verdict and punishment by death? Why is he not more defiant? Should he be more defiant? When we suffer injustice, are we simply to roll over in submission and die like Socrates? Maybe Crito has a point that that's the easier path, but maybe it's not the more virtuous path. What do you think about that? Should he have been more defiant in kind of not accepting that verdict. Let's think about this ancient dialogue and how it might be relevant to our day and time. How relevant are Socrates' ideas about justice and the individual's relationship to the state in contemporary society? Can we apply, should we apply his principles to modern political and legal systems? Must we always obey the laws, even when they're unjust? Does Socrates' principled approach here in the Crito lead to a kind of my country, love it or leave it sort of policy? Isn't that somehow dangerous? Why not a love it or change it approach? Shouldn't we resist unjust laws and the unjust application of laws? Is there any room in Socrates' view for things such as civil disobedience? If not, how can we have any kind of impact on progressive social change? It seems very complacent if we just accept the laws as they are, and if the laws are used and they're implied in such a way as to railroad us, we just sort of accept it. It's a complex set of questions, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but hopefully you get my drift. You might compare the Crito dialogue with the lives and writings of people like Gandhi, Thoreau, and Martin Luther King Jr. With those men, they took principled stands and chose to defy the laws of the state using forms of nonviolent civil disobedience. You could say that they were a lot less complacent than Socrates, more defiant. You could also say that, like Socrates, they wanted life to be more just and virtuous. I mean, Socrates has a high standard. These other men had a high standard too. And they also were willing to accept the legal consequences of their actions. So when Martin Luther King Jr. was put into Birmingham jail, did he talk about breaking out and running away? No. He let his civil disobedience, the injustice of the punishment he was receiving, play upon the conscience of the people. That's really the whole way that nonviolent civil disobedience works, right? You disobey the law, but then you accept the consequences of the law. So maybe these men are more aligned to Socrates than they might at first seem. And I know these situations are not parallel, and you can explore that in the comments if you wish. We can kick that around a little bit. I do think they're worth bringing into the discussion. Anyway, it's all good food for thought. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Please post some comments, some questions, and I encourage you to respond to one another. You're also welcome to make a response video. So if you've read the Crito, you've thought about this video, some of these discussion questions, and you want to post a reply, hop on YouTube and make a video and link back to me, and I hopefully will be able to catch it. So until next time, peace out, take care, and we'll go on to our next reading in the first year series.